This video is sponsored by Level Home. If you look at the built-in navigation, you'll probably notice that there are no fast public chargers down here. Experiment over, right? We're done. It was a bad idea and we had a bad time. Our car needs to get towed. We're screwed. This is Rivian's shortest range EV at just 258 miles of range. Something I've been scared of and asking myself for a long time is, could I make this short range EV work out? Well, that's what we're gonna be trying to figure out today. So join me on a trip from Houston to one of the most remote places in the great state of Texas, Big Bend National Park, to see 1, if a short range EV could handle this trip, 2, how comparable this trip would be to a gas vehicle, and most importantly, 3, was the actual trip when taking an EV like this stressful or fun? Let's find out. Driving to another place in Texas sounds easy, right? No. Texas is a massive state. It takes about 11 hours to drive from Houston to El Paso, which is on the other side of the state. And that's also roughly the same amount of time it would take someone to drive from Los Angeles to El Paso. So this is a trip to Big Bend, typically a 650-mile 10.5-hour non-stop drive. But instead of going all the way directly to Terralingua, we're also going to be splitting up that time into different segments to emulate a short, medium, and long length road trip in an EV. So that means stopping in Austin, Texas for the first night, then spending the majority of the next day driving to our lodging. Then we'll spend 2 nights there, close to Big Bend National Park, before spending an entire day driving all the way back to Houston. So wait a moment. Why Big Bend? You just don't decide to just drive a long, random road trip to one of the most remote places in a state without a reason, right? Well, it's 2 big reasons. I wanted a challenge. I wanted to see how difficult it would be if you were dealing with an EV with a smaller battery. Because let's be honest, in 5 or 10 years, when EVs are even more commonplace, 250 to 300 miles of range will probably be pretty common, especially at the entry-level price range. And the biggest reason I wanted to go to Big Bend National Park is because it's known for having one of the darkest skies in the United States, making it perfect for stargazing at night. It's always been on my bucket list to see the stars in as rural of a place as I possibly could, and maybe shoot some astrophotography. And I don't know, the idea overall just sounds so cool to me. All right, at this point, I'm basically done packing. But before I head out on any trip or adventure, the very first thing I think about after I leave the house is, did I lock the door? Well, that's when today's sponsor, the Level Lock Plus with Matter, comes in. This is a new smart lock by Level Home with a modern design, but with Matter support to give you flexibility to connect to any smart home that supports Matter. Basically, it's like any regular lock. It blends in seamlessly with your home aesthetic without looking clunky, and it comes in satin nickel or matte black to match your door's hardware. The Level Lock Plus with Matter uses a single CR2 battery that lives directly in the bolt so that it cuts down wasted space and looks just like a regular bolt. But I also love how easily it's integrated into my life. I'm an Apple Home user who switched over from my Google Home stuff, and I can tell you it's time consuming switching smart home platforms. When a device has Matter support, it means it'll have broad support across so many different smart home platforms. So I wouldn't even have to switch ecosystems. I could have controlled this lock with both Google and Apple. With Apple, I can take full control of it using the Apple Home Keys function, which enables you to take your iPhone or Apple Watch, just tap it on the lock and it opens the lock for you. The days have been getting cooler, so I've been taking my dog out for longer walks in the evening, and this feature saves me from having to keep my keys in my pocket. For random trips to the store or for long road trips like this one, I can easily check the status of my Level Lock Plus with Matter and ensure it's locked, giving me peace of mind. And it will even notify me in the Home app when the door is unlocked. So if you're interested in the Level Lock Plus with Matter, check them out using the link in the video description below. And thanks again to Level Home for sponsoring this portion of the video. All right, let's go. We're leaving the house at 2:08 with 100% battery. Let's see how long we can go.
Let's go.
A trip from Houston to Austin is one that we do several times a year, so it's a very easy trip that doesn't require much planning or thought. And really, for most of the trip, it went exactly like how it does every time. It was uneventful.
This traffic is awful, babe. We're not even out of the city.
Then, about 30 miles outside of Austin, we entered dangerous territory. We're in beaver country now. Buc-ee's is the mecca for long-distance travelers in a bunch of different states, like Texas, Alabama, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, and Missouri. Happy birthday. For your birthday, we got you Buc-ee's. It's a giant gas station that rivals a Walmart in size and selection. It's absolutely ridiculous. The best part about Buc-ee's though, besides their fantastic selection of cooked entrees and snacks, and the cleanest road trip restrooms the world has ever seen, is that they have a ton of gas station pumps and a ton of EV fast chargers too. Around the major Texas metros, it's usually Tesla superchargers at these Buc-ee's locations, and luckily, most of them have Tesla's Magic Dock system, which means you can charge CCS cars like our Rivian without using an adapter, which is fantastic.
I always like to verify that this thing is working before I start walking away, because I've been burned in the past. One time I plugged in, it was raining, I walked away, it wasn't charging, and then I had to fiddle with it in the rain, which wasn't fun.
So after about 30 minutes spent at Buc-ee's browsing and dining, we come back to a well-charged car. We made it to Austin with a total trip time of 3 hours and 30 minutes. Once we arrived, we had a nice dinner with my brother who lives in Austin, went grocery shopping, and then we headed to our hotel for the night. For this portion of the trip, I'm not really going to add this time into our total calculation since it was more of a side quest and something that we wanted to do besides this trip. So here's something that you don't get with the gas vehicle: refueling at your destination or your lodging. At our hotel, there were level 2 EV charging stations, letting us recharge while we relaxed and unwind in our hotel room. This way, once we wake up, we'll be able to leave with a fuller battery. We're going to be leaving in a better position that we came with, and might also mean that we can skip a charging session the next day altogether. So that's day one. Now, how would this go if we had a gas vehicle? Assuming we started with a full tank from our house, probably exactly the same way. We'd still stop at Buc-ee's either way. It's just a fun stop for us that we enjoy doing on basically every Texas road trip. So for the short distance leg of this trip, it's kind of a wash. Regardless of which type of vehicle you take, your total trip time would be very similar if you did the exact same things as us. Now, if you don't care for beavers, you would have arrived in Austin much quicker in a gas vehicle because the electric car would have needed to charge sometime in Austin before we headed to the hotel. Okay, on day 2, we started with 91% of range thanks to overnight charging at our hotel. We headed out to grab some breakfast and coffee, then began driving. Along this path to Terlingua, we made multiple charging stops, with the first stop in Junction, Texas, which was 140 miles away. Wait, what gives, Jimmy? If you had 91% battery, why would we need to stop just 140 miles later? This math ain't mathin'. Well, it's because EV range is a lie. Well, sort of. It's an estimate based on decent conditions, but the faster you drive in an EV, the more inefficient it becomes, and this decreases the chance you'll actually get your reported mileage. The same applies to gas cars, but to a lesser degree. But the opposite is true too. When you drive really slow or drive very efficiently, you can oftentimes beat the total range that an EV reports. So not every mile driven is worth the same. And combine that with the fact that in Texas, rural roads are often 75 to 80 miles an hour, we drain our batteries pretty fast. But luckily, we arrived at our destination with 16% and charged up to 66%. Total time spent charging was only 25 minutes.
Ew.
From there, we continued driving to Ozana. And I'll be honest, I've never driven through this part of Texas, and something about the Texas hill country was just so pretty to look at. So I really enjoyed this part of the drive and the winding roads and rocky terrain. We arrived at Ozana an hour and 10 minutes later. With an EV, you end up finding quickly that the best time to charge is while you eat. So it's ideal to eat where the charger is to maximize time savings. But that can be limiting because oftentimes where the chargers are placed aren't necessarily the place you want to eat or use the restroom. Like if I was in a gas car, I could just fill up in 5 minutes, then pick a place to eat. Here in Ozona, well, we're stuck with the funkiest looking Sonic I've ever seen with the stinkiest restrooms I've ever been in. But they did have Beyblade's kids meals, so I guess that more makes up for it. I sadly did not get the Beyblade kids toy. Maybe next time. So after we enjoyed the most interesting lunch, we came back to the car and we're ready to head out to our next destination, Fort Stockton. Now this is where I would normally give you a bit of insight into all the things we did in that hour or so that we took to drive to Fort Stockton, but there's not much to report. The roads were pretty plain and empty. And once we arrived in Fort Stockton, we charged at an EA station in the Walmart parking lot. And this provided us enough time to buy some things that we forgot to bring with us, like food containers, napkins, and some groceries we plan to cook during our visit to Big Bend.
No.
And at this point, a new idea popped up and we had a small shift in plans. We could, 1, go our planned route, head to Alpine, charge a little bit, and then head to Terlingua, or 2, drive through the national park, see some scenic views, then head to Terlingua. See, remember what I mentioned earlier? Speed plays a large role in how quickly your EV battery drains. In Big Bend National Park, the speed limit is 40 miles per hour, meaning we'll actually be draining the battery slower than its estimated range. So instead of heading to Alpine like we intended, we stayed in Fort Stockton to charge all the way up to 95%, and then headed off to Big Bend through a route that pushed us through Marathon, Texas. And that was the moment we realized our gamble paid off. After an hour or so of driving, we got to visit the Dinosaur Discovery exhibit, take some sample thumbnails for this video, and enjoy all the natural beauty the park has to offer. It was beautiful. It's a shame that Big Bend is sadly one of the US's least visited national parks. But at this point, it sounds about time that we need a charge, right? And you're absolutely right. If you look at the built-in navigation on your Rivian, their app, or any other EV, you'll probably notice that there are no fast public chargers down here. Experiment over, right? We're done. It was a bad idea, and we had a bad time. Our car needs to get towed. We're screwed. I'm just messing with you. Despite this, you have plenty of options. The first and easiest is to just book lodging that has level 2 chargers already. The place we were staying at had EV chargers available that we could use to fully charge our car by morning, just like we would at home. But if the place you're staying at doesn't have dedicated EV chargers, that's when you have to get creative. The next best option is to reserve an RV site with power. That way you can use a portable charger to charge your car. If you look around the area on sites like PlugShare, there's quite a few RV sites around Big Bend that EV owners have successfully used, with permission and payment, of course, to charge their cars. Level 2 chargers do take hours to charge, and this does limit you from doing other things because, well, your main mode of transportation is charging. Once we arrived at our lodging, we started charging our car for a bit and relaxed for a moment before we started heading out into Terralingua. There's not much out here. It's a very small town, but there is some nice restaurants here. Afterwards, we went back to our lodging, continued charging our car, and waited until dark to see the stars, and so that I can shoot the starry night sky and mark this off my bucket list. So that night, that was exactly what we did. We just enjoyed the total darkness of the new moon, and I spent a lot of time taking lots and lots of photos of the stars, and it was breathtaking. But it was also much more different in person than in pictures, especially in the photos I took. My photos aren't at the level that I wanted, but feel free to provide some night photography tips. Overall, I think it ended up pretty good for my first time, and we did have a good time before we went to bed. So how would the second day have gone if we went with the gas car? I think it would have been the first time we needed to get gas, so I'd had 15 minutes of getting gas in Junction. Then around the time that we arrived in Sonera would have been lunchtime, which we would spend 20 minutes to eat. Now at this point, we usually wouldn't need to grab gas again, but just like with EVs, Alpine is one of the last places with gas stations before you arrive in Terralingua or Big Bend. So just to be safe, we would have spent 15 minutes to get gas again. So here's how this medium length leg of the trip went. Overall, the EV did pretty well and only took about an hour and 10 minutes longer than our gas vehicle. Well, at least for this particular short range EV. All right, so let's move on to the third day. We left our accommodations with a full battery and spent all day exploring the park and going on some hikes. We definitely got to see some scenic views, and we drank lots and lots of water because it was hot. Too hot. Way too hot. We went to every corner of the park on a scenic drive, as well as putting in a few hikes here and there. And we managed to do this all on a single battery. Big Bend is relatively flat, but up in the Chizos Mountains is where the majority of elevation change happens. The Rivian R1S handled that perfectly, and even did great on some bumpy, unpaved roads during one of the paths leading to our trails. But even with all that, we still managed to arrive back at our accommodations with 24% left at the end of the day to recharge. This includes the many times that we took breaks, ate lunch in the car, and cooled down by running the AC on its highest setting for a good 15 minutes. And of course, after all that adventuring and eating dinner, we spent the rest of that night enjoying the stars in the pretty night sky again. I tried to shoot different things at night all before heading off to bed, since tomorrow will be a long day of driving. Now, how would day 3 have gone if we were in a gas car? I would say basically the same. We would have had enough gas for the entire day in the park too, and with the speed limit being slow and just lots of stops here and there really was no difference in time spent charging or otherwise. But now we have to talk about the last day and the toughest leg of the trip.
All right, it is right now 6:50 a.m. We're gonna be driving all the way back to Houston. As we're leaving, we have 100% battery. So let's see how this trip goes.
It was tough, but because the car needed to charge roughly every hour and a half to 2 hours, it actually made our shifts at driving not so bad at all. For the most part, we stopped at all the same locations we did on the way to Terralingua. This all comes with one minor caveat. We did go through a different city instead of Austin. We went to San Antonio. so our paths deviated a bit. Of course, we spent some time enjoying meals at our stops and had to stop at the biggest Buc-ee's in the US in Lowling, Texas. But honestly, by the end of it, we were just tired, not of driving or charging the car, just traveling in general, and the Beaver itself just wasn't enough motivation. Then we made it to our last charging stop in Sealy, which is about an hour out from Houston. After this charging stop is where we stopped counting time because we're deviating from the script again. Instead of heading all the way home, which was about an hour away, we stopped in Katy for a nice dinner because no one is gonna want to cook after a long day like this. So it was closer to 2 hours before we got home. Unpacking sucked and the car is super dirty from all the accumulated bug guts that we got the last few days. It's gonna need a wash. Okay, so this last day was tough, but how would a gas car do? We'd have to refuel in the morning before we leave Terlingua, but we'd also most likely have to stop in Fort Stockton just to stretch, to go to the restroom and switch drivers. I consider this a 15-minute break. From there, we'd refuel again in Junction and grab a bite to eat, adding 35 minutes of time. Then we'd pass through San Antonio and to Lulling for our Buc-ee's stop. From there, just like the EV trip, I'd add 2 hours, assuming we'd still want to stop in Katy and grab a bite for dinner. So here's how long it took on the longest leg of the trip. On average, it seems like an EV takes about 10 to 15% longer than if you were driving in a gas vehicle in both our medium and long length tests. All right, so now we see the whole picture of how long it took to drive to and from Houston to Big Bend in an EV. And honestly, if you think about it, the differences aren't all that massive. But at the same time, this is just based on how me and my wife drive. EVs benefit from charging frequently, and when they're low on battery, they charge faster. And so you end up with more stops in an EV, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It does allow you for more breaks in between and really segments the trips well. However, if you are the type to drive for 4 or 5 hours straight with no stopping until your tank is close to empty, obviously EVs would be a terrible choice for that kind of driver. But realistically, on a family trip, I don't think anyone would do that. When someone's gotta pee, someone's gotta pee. It's gonna be in the car or out. So my conclusion for this is this. If you own an EV, you can definitely make it, even going to remote places as Big Bend. But the ways you get there and the ways you spend your time there is limited by how many charging stations there are leading up to that place. There's like a million gas stations and you can stop whenever, but you can at least choose your option. And that's part of the pain of a road trip, finding clean restrooms. While with an EV, you have to be more intentional and really know your limits. It requires more thinking, and you don't get as much selection on restrooms unless you're willing to stop at other places. Driving an EV, including a short-range EV, is 100% possible, but the fact of the matter is, it's still 100% true. Gas cars give you way more flexibility for where you stop, when you stop, and for accommodations. So let's revisit the questions I had at the beginning of this video. Could a short-range EV handle this trip? And did we enjoy this trip as much as if we took a gas car? Of course. So if you own an EV, especially one with access to the Tesla supercharger network, go for it. As long as you planned ahead and are prepared for frequent breaks, you'll be fine. The key there is planning ahead and knowing how the trip will go. But if you're looking for a trip to a remote place without having to think about it much, rent a gas car. If it's just a regular road trip across the country though, you'll be okay, even with a shorter range EV. And I do think that we'd have similar levels of enjoyment on this trip, regardless of car type, EV or gas. We'd still make relatively frequent stops. But of course, driving a gas car there would still be a little less stressful. Anyway, that's how it went. Let me know what you personally think. If there's anything specific about it that you want to know more about using a short range EV like this in this kind of way, I'll try to respond where I can. Do you have any advice for people who have range anxiety about EVs? How would you do this trip differently? Leave all that down in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and I'll see you all next time. Bye.